ولسه معاكم من قلب واشنطن العاصمة الأمريكية بالولايات المتحدة الأمريكية. بنتابع مجريات وسير الانتخابات الأمريكية أو ماراثون الانتخابات الأمريكية والتنافس الشديد بين المرشح الديمقراطي كاميلا هاريس، المرشحة الديمقراطية كاميلا هاريس، والمرشح الجمهوري دونالد ترامب. وبيسعدنا أن يكون معنا في هذا اللقاء الخاص سيد ديفيد أستاذ بمعهد الشرق الأدنى وجنوب آسيا للدراسات الاستراتيجية بكلية الدفاع الوطني. أهلا بك في هذا اللقاء.
أهلا وسهلا سيدة.
هنبدأ لقائنا بالحديث عن العلاقات المصرية الأمريكية، كيف تراها؟
الصنادقة بين مصر وأمريكا كبيرة وطويلة، ولكن هذا مشكلة الاقتصادية والحكومية الديمقراطية في حكومية. But at the end of the day, it's very, very strong. I mean, you look at the friendship. The United States paid for Abu Simbel to be removed. When you go to the Metropolitan Museum of Art, you see the Temple of Dendur. Gamal Abdel Nasser gave that to the United States. And it is the best preserved work of art in the world because it is the cultural center of New York City. That's the true friendship between our countries, and that will always be strong.
سيد ديفيد، من سيفوز بالانتخابات الأمريكية ويكون سيد البيت الأبيض، كاميلا هاريس ولا المرشح الجمهوري دونالد ترامب؟
I personally think that when you have a historic candidate, the first woman, the first African American, they tend to get votes at a percentage lower than they poll. Right now the polls are exactly equal. So what I think is, what that means, if the polling is equal, President Harris, who would be our first woman president, our first South Asian president, she's behind.
استطلاعات الرأي في التصويت المبكر قالت انه كاميلا هاريس هي ممكن تفوز. هل ده ممكن يولد عنف بالولايات المتحدة الأمريكية، خصوصا بعد ما أعلن ترامب انه إذا فازت هاريس أنصاره هيعملوا مظاهرات، هيتظاهروا، وده هيعمل عدم استقرار في الولايات المتحدة الأمريكية؟
So historically what we've seen is that when a Republican candidate wins in the last 12 years, there tends to be civil disturbances across the country. When a Democratic candidate wins, we've seen civil disturbance associated with January 6th, but we haven't seen that was pretty much a one-off. We haven't seen that instability around the country. So I think that hopefully that the widespread riots we saw were a product of the COVID lockdown and the situation after the George Floyd murder, things of that nature. I hope that we've grown out of that. But usually violence, political violence in a disseminated, widespread manner is associated with the victory of a Republican rather than a Democrat.
هل تتوقع تغيير في السياسة الأمريكية الخارجية في حال فوز ترامب أو هاريس؟
Good question. So honestly, the broad paths of American foreign policy, they don't change regardless of who the president is because they reflect American interests, and American interests are the same. The United States wants to see Egypt that's prosperous, that people come to, not leave from. They want to see free passage in the Suez Canal. They want to see regional development. That's not a Republican or Democratic issue. What you do see is a difference of approach and a difference of who pays for things. President Trump is very big at saying, I want you to take care of yourself, not come to the United States. President Harris, on the other hand, most of her agenda seems to be domestically focused, so we can assume a continuation of what we've seen with President Biden and even President Obama.
كيف ستتعامل أمريكا مع القضايا الهامة كالحرب الروسية الأوكرانية وملف إيران النووي والحرب في الشرق الأوسط سواء في غزة أو لبنان، لو تحدثنا عن ذلك؟
Yeah, so let's start with Russia-Ukraine. So there, the Biden administration has not made a strategic case for victory. They haven't shown how Ukraine can win. They just react to that. I hope that if President Harris wins, she'll get rid of the people she has doing that and get new people. President Trump, on the other hand, I think will want to negotiate a settlement, but he'll want to do it from a position of strength. So I think we could see a surge in support to Ukraine followed by negotiations. When we look at China, I think there's not much difference between the two candidates. It is really remarkable in such a divided atmosphere in the last 15 years, people have realized that China is a very present threat to the United States, regardless of party. When we look at the Middle East, Iran is a separate issue. President Harris and most Democrats are burdened by the memory of the nuclear deal, which I think cannot be revived, but they seem to want to try to revive it. President Trump, on the other hand, will reimpose maximum pressure from day one, and he will tighten it down so that, again, he can negotiate from a position of strength. And given Israel's destruction of a lot of Iran's strategic capabilities, he may be able to do that. As far as Gaza and Hezbollah and Israel, I think that honestly what the United States wants or does will not matter, at least for the first 30 days. I think that Israel has security objectives. They're going to pursue them up to January 20th and then talk to the administration. And I think what the United States wants doesn't matter.
الجميع يهتم بما يحدث في غزة ولبنان. ما هي رؤيتك للمستقبل؟ لماذا لم تتدخل أمريكا حتى الآن لإنهاء الحرب؟ المجتمع العربي يلقي اللوم على الولايات المتحدة لعدم إنهائها لهذه الحرب.
I understand. So the issue is, I think most people overestimate the amount of influence the United States has over its security partners. So when the Egyptian forces were dealing with Beit el-Maqdis and Daesh in the Sinai, there were allegations there of indiscriminate bombings of Bedouin communities. And people were saying, how can the United States allow this? They have to stop this. When the Yemen armed forces, the Saudis, the Emiratis were fighting against the Houthis in Yemen, we saw the same thing. The arguments that they're using American aircraft, we need to stop this. We couldn't. There's this idea that there's a switch we flick and the airplanes fall from the sky. The fact of the matter is Israel has its own defense industry. They have stockpiles built up over years. If the United States were to rupture defense relationships with Israel, it would take years for that to have a practical effect on battlefield operations. So when President Harris tells them, you know, we want you, or President Biden or Vice President Harris say, we want you to stop doing this, they'll say, thank you, but we have security interests to pursue that you don't understand. Just as President el-Sisi told us when we expressed concern about civilian casualties in the war in the Sinai.
Mr. el-Sisi told you about what?
The United States said, we think that you are being too brutal in how you are conducting this war in the Sinai against Daesh and Ansar al-Maqdis, that there were civilians being bombed, the use of U.S. F-16s in striking Daesh in the Sinai. And the Egyptian government basically said, thank you for your opinion, but we live here, you don't. We're going to deal with the security threat.
عندما نتحدث عن الانتخابات الأمريكية، ما الذي يهم المواطن الأمريكي؟ ما الذي ينتظر المواطن الأمريكي من الرئيس القادم؟
Good question. So the big issues in this election are not foreign policy. The big issues are the economy, crime, which Americans on the right associate with immigration.
Yes.
And even Americans on the left now, because cities like New York are seeing increased numbers of immigrants, illegal immigrants, and then abortion rights. The fourth issue, which is Ms. Harris's issue, is the character of Donald Trump, threats to democracy. But that's not a generalized, that's viewed as a partisan issue, because obviously people on the right don't say that they don't see that as a threat. So those are the general threats. Foreign policy in the United States usually only impacts specialty level. So people who their family is from Ireland, they care a lot about Ireland, you know, Northern Ireland and the British. People who are from Israel or who have family in Israel care a lot about Israel. People who have families in Gaza or Lebanon care a lot about you know, the war against Hamas and the war against Hezbollah and the effects on Lebanon. But in general, there's not a widespread American concern about foreign policy, with one exception, which is that nobody wants to see us looking like we're being played.
تعقد الانتخابات الأمريكية في نفس التوقيت مع انتخابات الكونغرس بمجلسي مجلس الشيوخ ومجلس النواب. أعتقد أن انتخابات مجلس النواب الأمريكية لا تحظى بالاهتمام الكافي. لماذا تتجه جميع الأنظار نحو انتخابات الرئاسة الأمريكية فقط؟
Yeah, well, so there's one thing. So the House of Representatives, so the Majlis al-Shabi, that all gets reelected. But in the Senate, Majlis Shuyukh, only 1/3 of the senators get elected. So the other 2/3 aren't running for election. And that's because the House of Representatives is supposed to represent the popular will. The Senate is supposed to be more deliberative and take its time.
There is a sharp competition between the Democratic Party and the Republican Party.
Yes, extremely. So, we have a weird system. Nobody else has it. What you'll find is that nationally, national news tends to focus on the president because that affects everybody. And the elections for the House of Representatives and the Senate, that is reflected more in the local news. The problem is, in the last 20 years, since the advent of the internet, local news sources have really declined. And so we just don't see local news sources the way we used to have it. We don't see the local press and the local media the way we used to.
Thank you so much. بشكرك شكرا جزيلا.
لا شكرا واجب.
وبكده خلص لقائنا مع سيد ديفيد روش. انتظرونا في لقاءات أخرى وحكايات جديدة بزوايا جديدة ومختلفة من قلب العاصمة الأمريكية واشنطن في بودكاست حكاوي مع أمل الحناوي. خليكم معانا.